Each year, military reconnaissance units operating in the remote wilderness regions of North America report encounters with geographical anomalies that seem to defy standard cartographic protocols and challenge our understanding of spatial reality itself. It occurs so frequently that classified divisions within the Defense Mapping Agency and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency have dedicated entire departments to investigating what they internally refer to as persistent phantom settlements, locations that appear on military-grade mapping systems but officially do not exist in any census, land registry, or historical record. The Appalachian mountain range, stretching over 1,500 miles through dense forest and isolated valleys, has been home to over 2,000 documented abandoned settlements since the early 1800s, many lost to economic collapse, environmental disasters, or circumstances that remain deliberately obscured in federal archives. For a brief period during the autumn of 1994, a 5-man Marine Force reconnaissance unit conducting routine terrain mapping exercises in the Monongahela National Forest would stumble upon a settlement so impossibly preserved and so fundamentally wrong in its existence that it would force the Department of Defense to establish Protocol Blackwood, a classification level above top secret, specifically designed to contain information about locations that refuse to stay buried. But what exactly was the town of Ashford Hollow, a place that appeared on their tactical maps with perfect clarity, yet had been officially erased from every government database since 1952? And why did only one member of that reconnaissance team emerge from the valley 3 weeks later, unable to speak for 6 months and institutionalized for another 2 years before he could finally articulate the horror of what waits in places that exist between the lines of our maps? The Monongahela National Forest sprawls across 921,000 acres of West Virginia's most unforgiving terrain, a vast expanse of steep ridgelines, deep hollows, and old-growth forest so dense that entire valleys remain in perpetual twilight even at midday. The region experiences temperature drops of up to 40 degrees between ridge tops and valley floors, creating thick ground fog that can persist for days, swallowing entire sections of landscape into impenetrable white curtains that disorient even the most experienced outdoorsmen. During autumn, when temperature inversions trap cold air in the valleys, these fog banks can become so dense that visibility drops to less than 3 feet, and the moisture in the air grows thick enough to taste, carrying with it the smell of decaying leaves, wet limestone, and something older that seems to seep up from the soil itself. The forest's topography is a nightmare for navigation, with magnetic anomalies caused by iron-rich rock formations that can throw compass readings off by as much as 15 degrees, and the dense canopy interference that renders GPS unreliable in over 60% of the region. It is perhaps unsurprising, then, that the Monongahela has the highest rate of missing persons cases per square mile of any national forest in the United States, with over 340 documented disappearances since 1960, and at least twice that number suspected but never officially reported, vanishing into a wilderness that has always been far better at keeping secrets than revealing them. Long before European settlers arrived, the Shawnee and Cherokee peoples who hunted these mountains maintained strict taboos about certain valleys, referring to them in their oral traditions as Nvda I Adanvdo, places where the dead walk in daylight. 18th century colonial records from Fort Henry, dating to 1774, contain multiple accounts from frontier scouts describing settlements they'd observed from ridgelines that, upon investigation, proved to contain no living inhabitants, despite showing clear signs of recent occupation. Smoke rising from chimneys, livestock in pens, laundry hanging on lines, only to discover upon entering that the homes contained nothing but dust. The food on tables had turned to black mold, and the livestock were desiccated husks that hadn't seen life in decades. A particularly detailed account from British surveyor Edmund Blackwood, whose journals were sealed in the Library of Congress until 1983, describes finding an entire logging camp in 1792 that his team had heard operating, axes striking wood, men shouting, steam whistles blowing, only to discover when they descended into the valley that the camp had been abandoned for at least 50 years. The equipment rusted beyond recognition, and the calendar in the foreman's office frozen on a date from 1741. Blackwood's final journal entry, written the night before his team attempted to leave the valley, reads simply, The town is breathing. We hear it through the walls. God forgive us for mapping what was meant to stay hidden. Neither Blackwood nor any of his 7-man survey team were ever seen again, though their equipment was found 3 years later arranged in a perfect circle on a ridge 12 miles from where they'd made camp, each compass pointing inward toward the center. Military encounters with geographical impossibilities in the Monongahela region date back to World War II, when Army Air Corps pilots conducting low-altitude navigation training reported seeing a town in the Shavers Fork Valley that appeared on their 1943 tactical maps as Settlement 47B, but was marked with a red X and the notation, "Avoid, no radio contact possible." In 1967, a 6-man Army Ranger training unit conducting land navigation exercises reported spending an entire night in what they described as a fully functioning mining town, complete with electric streetlights, a working diner, and fresh tire tracks on the roads, only to return with their instructors the following morning to find nothing but virgin forest. No foundations, no cleared land, not even evidence that trees had ever been cut. Similar encounters were reported by National Guard units in 1973, 1981, and 1989, each incident resulting in immediate psychiatric evaluation of the reporting personnel and classification of their after-action reports under National Security Decision Directive protocols that effectively erased the incidents from official record. The Defense Intelligence Agency's Project Stygian Cartography, a classified program that operated from 1985 to 1993, was specifically tasked with investigating persistent topographical anomalies in the Appalachian region and reportedly identified 17 separate locations where military-grade GPS systems and traditional maps showed settlements that field verification teams could never locate, or in 3 documented cases, teams that located the settlements but never returned from them, their last radio transmissions cut off mid-sentence, followed by weeks of silence before search and rescue operations were mysteriously called off by direct order from the Pentagon. October 17, 1994, 1847 hours. Staff Sergeant Marcus Vale, call sign Wraith, led his 4-man force recon team down the eastern slope of Bickle Knob Ridge, their boots crunching through ankle-deep leaves still wet from the previous night's rain, the air thick with the smell of rotting vegetation and the metallic tang that always seemed to hang in these valleys when the fog rolled in. Vale had earned his call sign during Desert Storm for his uncanny ability to navigate featureless terrain without GPS, a skill that had kept his team alive through 3 tours, and he'd handpicked each man on this operation. Corporal Ben Kodiak Brenner, a massive Alaskan with 20 years of wilderness survival training, who could read weather patterns like some men read newspapers. Lance Corporal Felix Harrow, their communications specialist and amateur historian who'd memorized every declassified military operation in Appalachia. Private First Class Vincent Yu, their medic and the youngest at 23, sharp-eyed and quick-thinking. And Sergeant Elias Creed, their scout and marksman, a West Virginia native who'd grown up hunting these very mountains and claimed he could smell a storm 3 days before it arrived. Their mission was straightforward: conduct a 5-day terrain mapping exercise to update tactical charts for potential future training operations, establish 3 observation posts along predetermined ridgelines, and return to their FOB with geological and topographical data. At 1852 hours, as they descended into what their maps designated as Grid Square 47 Tango, Vale noticed the temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees in the span of 50 yards, their breath now visible in thick clouds, and the fog that had been wisping through the trees suddenly thickened into a solid wall that reduced visibility to barely 10 feet, forcing them to switch to tactical flashlights, even though sunset was still 40 minutes away. Harrow checked their position on his GPS unit and frowned, tapping the screen twice before looking up at Vale with an expression that made something cold settle in the sergeant's gut. "Sir, we've got a settlement dead ahead, maybe 200 meters, but it's not marked on any of our physical maps, just showing up on the GPS as a cluster of structures designated Ashford Hollow. And according to the metadata, this location was flagged for avoidance by an Army survey team in 1952. Before Vale could respond, the wind shifted, carrying with it the unmistakable smell of wood smoke. and frying bacon, sounds that had no business existing in the middle of uninhabited wilderness. And through the fog ahead, they could see lights, soft yellow glows that pulsed gently like gas lamps, arranged in neat rows that suggested streets, buildings, civilization where there should have been nothing but trees and darkness. They approached with weapons ready, moving in a tactical wedge formation. But the closer they got to the lights, the more wrong everything felt. The fog seemed to part around them deliberately, like curtains being pulled aside by invisible hands. And the temperature continued to drop until Vale could see frost forming on Kodiak's beard, despite it being mid-October and nearly 60 degrees at the ridgetop just minutes before. At 19:04 hours, they emerged onto a paved road, genuine asphalt that looked freshly laid, with painted yellow center lines still bright and clean. And before them stood a town that simply could not exist. A main street lined with two-story buildings, their windows glowing with warm interior light. A diner with a neon sign reading Millie's that buzzed and flickered in perfect working order. Street lamps that hummed with electric current casting pools of amber illumination through the fog and beyond. Rows of neat houses with porches and rocking chairs, some with carved pumpkins on the steps, others with American flags hanging limp in the still air. Yu checked his watch 3 times, holding it up to his ear, because the digital display had frozen at 6:47 p.m., refusing to advance no matter how many times he reset it. While Creed's compass spun lazily in circles, the needle unable to find magnetic north, just rotating in slow revolutions that made soft clicking sounds with each pass. The smell was overwhelming now. Not just wood smoke and cooking food, but fresh paint, motor oil brewing, coffee, cut grass, and underneath it all, something that reminded Vale of formaldehyde, that sharp chemical preservation smell he'd encountered in morgues, sweet and wrong, and making his sinuses burn. Harrow attempted to raise their FOB on the radio, but received only static, then tried his emergency beacon, his satellite phone, even his personal cell phone. All dead, all displaying error messages or simply blank screens, as if every form of electromagnetic communication had been snuffed out the moment they'd entered the town limits. They moved down the main street, weapons up, eyes scanning, and through the diner's plate glass window, Vale could see coffee cups sitting on the counter, steam rising from them in thin ribbons, a slice of pie on a plate with a fork beside it, the register drawer hanging open with cash visible inside, but not a single human being anywhere. Not in the diner, not in the hardware store with its door standing ajar, not in the post office with lights blazing, and a radio playing big band music from the 1940s. Not in any of the dozen houses they could see. Just the evidence of people, the remnants of lives being lived, frozen in a moment that felt like it had been interrupted seconds before their arrival. At 19:23 hours, Kodiak broke protocol and entered the diner, drawn by coffee that smelled so real and normal that it made his head swim after the wrongness of everything else. And Vale followed, unable to stop him, knowing on some instinct level that separating in this place would be fatal. The interior was immaculate. Red vinyl booths without a single crack, chrome fixtures polished to mirror brightness, a jukebox in the corner displaying songs from 1952, the same year the Army had flagged this location, and on the counter sat 6 coffee cups, steam still rising, arranged in a perfect row as if waiting for customers who would never arrive. Kodiak reached for one of the cups, his massive hand trembling slightly, and the moment his fingers touched the ceramic, every light in the town went out simultaneously. Not gradually, not flickering, but snuffed out in an instant like a switch had been thrown, plunging them into absolute darkness broken only by their tactical lights. Then the screaming started, high-pitched and childlike, echoing from somewhere outside, from everywhere outside, a sound that didn't match any human voice Vale had ever heard. Too sustained, too perfect in its pitch, like an air raid siren shaped into a child's shriek, and beneath it, a deeper sound, rhythmic and wet, like hundreds of people breathing in perfect unison. Yu's tactical light caught movement through the window. Figures in the street, dozens of them standing motionless in the fog, and when Vale's light swept across them, his blood turned to ice because they were wearing uniforms. Military uniforms from different eras, World War II infantry gear, Korean War fatigues, Vietnam-era jungle patterns, even what looked like Revolutionary War Continental Army coats, all of them standing in perfect formation, heads tilted back at impossible angles, mouths hanging open, and from those open mouths came the breathing sound, synchronized and endless. Kodiak stumbled backward, knocking over the coffee cups, and where the liquid spilled onto the counter, the surface began to smoke and dissolve, of the chrome bubbling and peeling away to reveal wood underneath that was black with rot and crawling with insects that scattered in waves across the countertop. "Out now!" Vale roared, but as they turned for the door, Creed, who'd been standing watch outside, screamed once, a sound of pure animal terror that cut off with a wet crunch, and when they burst through the door with weapons raised, they found him lying on the sidewalk, his body bent backward at an angle that broke every rule of human anatomy. His spine curved so severely that his head touched the backs of his knees. His mouth stretched open far wider than should have been possible, and from his throat came not blood, but a thick black smoke that poured out in billowing clouds, smelling of burning hair and old graves, while his eyes, still conscious, still aware, still seeing, rolled in terror as his body continued to bend and fold in on itself like wet paper being crumpled by an invisible fist, bones snapping with sounds like green wood breaking, until finally, mercifully, something vital gave way, and Sergeant Elias Creed, 34 years old, West Virginia native, the man who'd sworn he knew these mountains better than his own face, collapsed into a pile of folded meat and shattered bone that steamed in the cold air. While around them, the figures in the fog took one synchronized step forward, their boots hitting pavement in perfect unison, a sound like a judge's gavel coming down on a verdict that had been decided long before any of them were born. Vale dragged Kodiak and Yu backward into the diner, slamming the door shut and overturning tables to barricade the entrance, his training screaming at him to establish a defensive position, to create fields of fire, to follow protocols that had kept him alive through a decade of combat. But every instinct he'd honed told him that tactics meant nothing here, that this wasn't an enemy that could be fought with rifles and grenades. Harrow worked frantically on the radio equipment, cycling through every frequency, broadcasting mayday calls on emergency channels, trying military bands, civilian bands, even ham radio frequencies, his voice cracking as he repeated their call sign and grid coordinates into a wall of static that occasionally seemed to breathe back at him, a sound like someone listening on the other end but refusing to respond. Yu had gone pale, crouched in the corner, staring at his hands which trembled uncontrollably, muttering medical terminology under his breath like a prayer. Acute stress reaction, environmental disorientation, possible toxic exposure, grasping for rational explanations even as the coffee cups they'd knocked over continued to eat through the counter, the rot spreading in perfect circles, black mold blooming across surfaces that had been pristine moments before. Through the windows, the figures remained motionless, a perimeter of silent watchers in mismatched uniforms, and Vale counted at least 40 of them now, more emerging from the fog with each passing minute, all maintaining that same impossible posture with heads tilted back and mouths gaping open. At 1947 hours, Kodiak, still gripping his rifle with white-knuckled intensity, spoke in a voice that didn't sound like his own, hollow and distant. "Staff Sergeant, I found something in the register. Receipts. Dozens of them, all dated October 17, 1952, exactly 42 years ago today. And they're all for the same items, same amounts, same handwriting, like someone processed the same 6 transactions over and over again." Vale took the receipts with hands that wanted to shake, but refused to let themselves, seeing names written in neat script. John Vickers, Mary Holloway, Thomas Wade, Sarah Brenner, Elizabeth Yu, Marcus Blackwood. Names that made his skin crawl because 3 of them matched surnames in his own team. A coincidence that felt too deliberate, too specifically designed to tell them something they didn't want to understand. And the last name, Blackwood, connecting directly to the British surveyor who'd vanished in these mountains 2 centuries ago, whose final journal entry had warned about places that breathe. Harrow abandoned the useless radio and began tearing through the diner's back office, finding filing cabinets filled with documents that shouldn't exist. Town records dating back to 1847, when Ashford Hollow had been established as a mining settlement, population 247, specializing in anthracite coal extraction, from deep shaft mines that extended nearly a mile beneath the valley floor. The files contained census records, birth certificates, death certificates, and near the bottom of the third drawer, a leather-bound journal marked Town Council Minutes, restricted, its pages yellow and brittle but perfectly preserved, detailing a series of increasingly desperate meetings held in September 1952. According to the minutes, the mines had broken through into something the council referred to only as the Deep Hollow, a massive subterranean chamber that the miners described as feeling occupied and aware, a space where their lights would dim without explanation, where their voices would echo back in different tones, and where 3 men had vanished between one breath and the next, simply ceasing to exist while their co-workers watched. The town council had voted to seal the mines immediately, but the night before the demolition was scheduled, every resident of Ashford Hollow had gathered in the church for an emergency meeting called by the mine foreman, a man named Silas Merrick, and the final entry, dated October 17, 1952, written in handwriting that grew increasingly erratic, read, "Silas says the Hollow wants tribute. Says it's been waiting under the mountain since before the Shawnee gave it the first offerings. Says it breathes through the spaces between our world and the underneath, and if we feed it willing, it will preserve us forever, keep us perfect, keep us together, keep us aware even after our bodies fail. And God forgive us, but we're voting yes because the alternative is watching our children die of the sickness that's already spreading. The rot that came up from the deep hollow and is eating through flesh faster than any disease known to medicine." Attached to the journal with a rusted paperclip was a photograph, black and white, showing the entire town assembled on the main street, 247 faces staring at the camera with expressions of resigned terror. And in the background, barely visible through photographic grain, stood the church with its doors thrown wide open and something massive and dark filling the doorway. Something with too many angles and a shape that hurt to look at, even in a decades-old photograph. Harrow's hands shook as he read aloud the final line, written sideways in the margin in what looked like dried blood. "We walked in singing, and the hollow sang back, and now we wait for the next October 17th when the door opens thin enough for others to find us, to see us, to join us in the breathing dark where time doesn't pass and preservation is eternal, and the only cost is remembering what it felt like to be alive." At 2014 hours, the lights came back on all at once. Every bulb in the diner blazing at triple intensity, so bright it seared their retinas and cast shadows so black they looked solid. And through the windows they watched the figures outside begin to move, not walking but gliding across the pavement. Their boots making contact sounds but their bodies moving with the wrong physics. Too smooth, too fluid, like marionettes pulled by expert hands. Ya screamed and pointed at the counter where the spilled coffee had been. The rot had stopped spreading and was now reversing. The black mold receding, the chrome bubbling back into perfect condition, time running backward in localized pockets, and in the corner booth a plate of pie appeared that hadn't been there before, steam rising from fresh filling. A fork positioned beside it at a perfect angle, Kodiak made a decision born of desperation and pure survival instinct, grabbing one of the emergency flares from his pack and igniting it. The magnesium burning at 3,000 degrees and filling the diner with harsh red light. And the moment the flare ignited, every figure outside recoiled simultaneously, their bodies jerking backward in perfect synchronization, mouths stretching wider, and from those gaping throats came a sound like industrial machinery grinding to a halt, metal shrieking against metal. "Fireworks, whatever they are, they don't like the heat." Kodiak roared, igniting a second flare and hurling it through the window. The glass shattering outward, and where the flare landed on the street, the asphalt began to melt and peel away, revealing not dirt underneath, but something that looked organic gray and pulsing, covered in a network of thin veins that throbbed with slow rhythm. The figures retreated further, creating a circle around the burning flare, but they didn't flee, didn't disperse. They were simply repositioning, regrouping, and Vale understood with sick certainty that the flares had bought them minutes at most, a temporary reprieve that only emphasized how completely trapped they were. Yu had crawled to the shattered window and was staring down at the exposed surface beneath the asphalt, his medical training warring with what his eyes were. "Staff Sergeant, that's living tissue. The whole town is built on top of something alive, something massive, and I think, Jesus Christ, I think the pavement, the buildings, all of it is just a shell, a lure, something it grew to attract us." Harrow's radio suddenly crackled to life, not with static but with voices. Dozens of them overlapping, speaking in different languages, different time periods, and through the chaos, Vale could make out fragments. October 17th, 1774. This is Surveyor Blackwood. If anyone receives this transmission. Alpha Squad reporting, year 1967. We are trapped in a settlement that appears to be. For the love of God, someone tell our families we didn't desert. Tell them the town took us. Tell them we're still. The transmission cut off, replaced by that breathing sound again, now coming from inside the diner itself. From the walls, from the floor, from the very air they were pulling into their lungs. And Kodiak backed toward the others, flare held high, his voice breaking as he said what they were all thinking. We're not in a town, we're inside something, and I don't think it plans to let us leave. At 20:43 hours, the flares burned out simultaneously, despite being different ages and fuel levels. Their light snuffed like candles in a vacuum, and in the darkness that followed, the town began to change in ways that violated every law of physics Vale had ever learned. The walls of the diner stretched upward, the ceiling receding into impossible distance while the floor remained solid beneath their boots, creating a vertical space that couldn't exist within the building's external dimensions. Through the shattered window, the street outside had multiplied. The same row of buildings now repeated 7 times in concentric circles, each ring rotating slowly in opposite directions like gears in some vast machine. And standing in each iteration of the street were the figures. No longer 40 but hundreds, thousands. An army of preserved soldiers and civilians from every era spanning 3 centuries, all maintaining that same head-tilted back posture, all breathing in perfect synchronization. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that frost formed on every surface in seconds, their breath crystallizing in the air and falling like snow. And used thermometer, one of the few instruments still functioning, registered negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit despite the diner's interior somehow remaining warm enough to prevent hypothermia, as if the cold was selective, choosing what it wanted to freeze. Gravity began to fail in localized pockets, coffee cups rising from tables and hanging suspended in midair, silverware orbiting slowly around fixed points like planets around invisible suns, and Harrow's documentation, the journal and photographs he'd found, lifted from his hands and arranged themselves in a spiral pattern on the wall, pages turning on their own, showing them images of previous victims, previous October 17ths, previous teams that had found Ashford Hollow and never left. The sky visible through the window had turned a color that didn't exist in nature, a shade between purple and black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And across its surface moved shapes too large to comprehend geometric patterns that hurt to perceive angles that folded in on themselves in ways that made Vale's eyes water, and his brain scream that what he was seeing was impossible, couldn't be processed, shouldn't exist. The breathing sound intensified until it became physical, pressure waves that pushed against their bodies with each exhalation, and they could feel it now through the floor. A massive rhythmic pulsing like being inside the chest cavity of something incomprehensibly vast. Something that had been waiting beneath this valley for millennia, using the town as bait as a fishing lure cast into the stream of time catching victims, whenever the dimensional barriers grew thin enough on this specific date. Kodiak was the first to break the massive Alaskan, dropping his rifle and pressing his hands against his temples, screaming that he could hear his name being called by his mother, who died in 1987, her voice coming from the walls, from the floor begging him to come find her in the basement of a building that hadn't existed a moment ago, but now stood across the street with lights in its windows and a door hanging open in invitation. Yu had curled into a fetal position, his medical training completely shattered, muttering formulas and anatomical terms that made no sense, describing organs that humans didn't possess, surgical procedures for conditions that couldn't exist, his mind trying desperately to catalog and categorize the impossible and failing catastrophically in the attempt. Harrow's radio had come fully alive, broadcasting not static but screams, hundreds of overlapping voices crying out in dozens of languages, some of them dead languages that shouldn't be spoken anymore, Sumerian and Proto-Germanic and tongues older than recorded history, all of them begging for help that would never come, trapped in a moment that repeated endlessly. Useless, the ammunition in his magazines expanding and contracting, like the rounds were breathing the metal of his rifle, growing hot enough to burn through his gloves. And when he tried to drop it, his hands wouldn't obey, fingers locked around the grip as if the weapon had fused to his flesh. The figures outside had begun to move in coordinated patterns, executing complex formations that created symbols on the street, shapes that Vale recognized from the surveyor Blackwood's journals. The same warnings the Shawnee had carved into trees to mark places where reality grew thin. And as the patterns completed, the air inside the diner began to thicken, becoming viscous, each breath requiring conscious effort to pull in, the oxygen tasting wrong, metallic and sweet like inhaling blood. Equipment malfunctioned in cascading failures. Kodiak's watch hands spinning backward at increasing speed, used medical kits spilling open, and its contents arranging themselves into anatomical diagrams of impossible creatures. Harrow's flashlight beam bending at 90-degree angles and illuminating spaces that weren't there, corners that didn't exist, doorways opening onto voids where the laws of physics had given up entirely. They could see through the walls now, the diner becoming transparent, revealing the pulsing organic mass beneath the town's facade, a network of tissue and strange geometries that extended down through the earth for miles. And at its center, far below, something massive and aware turned its attention upward toward them. And the moment that attention focused, all four of them felt it, a presence so vast and so utterly alien that their minds simply couldn't hold the concept, like trying to pour an ocean into a teacup. And what spilled over was pure existential terror, the absolute certainty that they were being observed by something that existed outside normal space and time, something that viewed them not as threats or prey, but as collector's items, specimens to be preserved and displayed in its eternal museum of moments stolen from the flow of linear time. At 21:19 hours, every exit sealed simultaneously, the door they'd barricaded fused with the wall as if it had never existed, the shattered window repairing itself with glass that grew like crystal from the frame. Even the air vents closing with flesh-like membranes that pulsed in rhythm with the breathing beneath them, and they understood with absolute clarity that escape was no longer an option, had perhaps never been an option from the moment they descended into the valley. The figures outside pressed against the windows, hundreds of pale faces with clouded eyes and slack jaws, condensation from their impossible breathing, fogging the glass. And through that fog, they drew symbols with fingers that moved in ways fingers shouldn't move, bones bending and extending, creating warnings or invitations in a language that predated human civilization. The floor beneath them had become transparent, revealing the organic infrastructure below, and they could see now that the entire valley was a single organism, or perhaps a gateway, a thin place where something massive pressed against reality, like a hand pushing through a membrane, and the town of Ashford Hollow was just the fingerprint it left behind, the impression of its touch upon the world. Kodiak had stopped screaming, and now sat perfectly still, tears streaming down his face, whispering coordinates that made no geographic sense, numbers that spiraled into impossible values, locations that existed in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. Yu had begun laughing, high and broken, pointing at his own hands which were starting to become transparent, his flesh fading to translucence, veins and bones visible beneath skin that no longer looked entirely solid, and he kept repeating, "We're being preserved, we're being added to the collection, we're going to be perfect forever," in a voice that held both terror and something that might have been relief. Harrow's documentation had arranged itself into a timeline on the wall, showing October 17th across 3 centuries, 1774, 1847, 1892, 1917, 1952, 1967, 1994. Each date marking a moment when the barrier thinned and the hollow beneath reached up to claim new specimens, and beside each date were names, dozens of them, hundreds, all the people who'd found Ashford Hollow and been absorbed into its eternal preservation, their consciousness trapped in an infinite moment of awareness without release. The breathing sound reached a crescendo, the entire diner shaking with each exhalation, and through the floor they could see it now, the thing beneath. Not a creature, but a space. A hollow in reality where physics broke down and time flowed in directions it wasn't meant to flow. And at its center, something massive and patient and older than the mountains themselves waited with the timeless certainty of geology, knowing that eventually, inevitably, all things fell into the spaces between what was real and what was possible. Vale felt his own consciousness beginning to fragment, pieces of his awareness detaching and floating away like leaves in a current, memories becoming unstuck from linear sequence, and he experienced simultaneously his birth and his death and every moment between, all compressed into a single eternal now. And the last coherent thought he could form before his sense of self began to dissolve was the understanding that they hadn't discovered Ashford Hollow at all. It had discovered them, had called them down from the ridge with lights and smells and the promise of normalcy in the wilderness, had chosen them specifically because their names matched the pattern, because they were meant to complete the collection, because on October 17, 1994, the Hollow was hungry and they had walked willingly into its mouth. At 21:47 hours, reality snapped back with the violence of a rubber band stretched to breaking point. The sound came first, massive and earth-shaking, the roar of military helicopters descending through impossible fog, and then explosions not random, but precisely coordinated thermite charges, detonating in a perfect grid pattern around the town's perimeter, burning at temperatures hot enough to melt steel, hot enough to make the organic tissue beneath the streets scream in frequencies that shattered what remained of the diner's windows. The thing beneath Ashford Hollow recoiled, its attention wrenched away from the four men inside the diner, and in that moment of distraction, the walls solidified, the floor became opaque again, gravity reasserted itself with crushing suddenness, and Vale found himself gasping on his hands and knees, his rifle clattering beside him, his mind slamming back into linear time with whiplash force that made blood pour from his nose. Through the broken windows he could see them now. Unmarked Black Hawk helicopters hovering at dangerous low altitude, their downdraft tearing the fog apart in violent spirals, and rappelling down fast ropes came soldiers in uniforms without insignia, wearing gas masks and carrying weapons Vale had never seen in any official armory, strange rifles that fired rounds that burned with the same harsh magnesium light as their emergency flares, each impact point erupting in white phosphorus brilliance that made the figures outside writhe and dissolve like photographs thrown into fire. A voice crackled through a loudspeaker, flat and without emotion. "Ground team, this is Blackwood Actual. You are inside a Class 7 spatial anomaly. Remain in position. Extraction in 90 seconds. Do not engage hostiles. Do not attempt to retrieve fallen personnel. Acknowledge." Vale tried to respond, but his radio was still dead, so he simply raised his hand, fingers shaking uncontrollably, and through vision that kept doubling and blurring, he watched as the masked soldiers established a perimeter, their weapons firing in coordinated bursts that created a corridor of burning light, leading from the diner to the nearest helicopter. Kodiak had regained enough coherence to stand pulling you up with him, the medic's skin still faintly translucent veins visible, like he was a medical diagram come to life, muttering about cellular degradation and quantum entanglement in a voice that didn't quite sound like his own anymore. Harrow clutched the town journal to his chest like a holy relic, his eyes wide and unblinking, and when Vale grabbed his shoulder to move him toward extraction, the communications specialist whispered in a voice barely above a breath, "They've done this before, Staff Sergeant. This is Protocol Blackwood, named after the surveyor who disappeared here. They've been cleaning up this place every 42 years since 1774, burning it back, pushing it down, and it always comes back because you can't kill a hole in reality. You can only cauterize it temporarily." The masked soldiers were at the door now, breaking through what remained of the barricade with crowbars that glowed faintly blue. Some kind of cold fire technology that made the organic material beneath scream and retreat, and hands grabbed Vale roughly, professionally, hauling him toward the exit, and the last thing he saw before they dragged him into the helicopter was the main street of Ashford Hollow, collapsing in on itself. Buildings folding down like cardboard boxes, the church steeple toppling sideways and dissolving into smoke, and the pavement peeling away in sheets to reveal the pulsing tissue beneath, now burning, now dying, now retreating back into the deep hollow where it would wait, patient and eternal for the barriers to thin again. The helicopter climbed hard and fast, the pilot pushing the aircraft beyond safe parameters, and through the open bay door, Vale watched as the entire valley erupted in flames. Not natural fire, but something chemical and precise. white-hot streamers that burned in patterns clearly designed by people who understood exactly what they were fighting, incinerating not just the town but the forest around it, the earth itself cutting away the infected tissue of reality like a surgeon excising a tumor. A man in colonel's insignia but no name tape sat across from them, his face carved from stone, holding a tablet that displayed real-time satellite imagery of the valley being systematically destroyed, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority that came from dealing with horrors that officially didn't exist. Gentlemen, I am Colonel Marcus Webb, JSOC Special Activities Division, and as of this moment, your mission to Grid Square, 47 Tango never happened. You will be transported to a secure medical facility where you will undergo evaluation and treatment for acute radiation exposure, a cover story that will explain your symptoms and justify your immediate removal from active duty. Webb's eyes, gray and cold as winter steel, swept across each of them. Sergeant Creed's body will be recovered and returned to his family with full military honors. Cause of death listed as equipment failure during a training accident, and you will not speak of what occurred in that valley to anyone, not your families, not your therapists, not your priests, not each other. Violation of this directive will result in immediate detention under National Security Decision Directive 298, which allows for indefinite incarceration without trial for personnel who possess knowledge of phenomena classified above top secret code word. Beside Vale U had begun seizing his body, convulsing as whatever the hollow had done to him reasserted itself, foam bubbling from his lips, and the medical team aboard the helicopter swarmed him with equipment that looked more suited to a nuclear accident than a conventional medical emergency, injecting him with compounds from unmarked vials, hooking him to machines that displayed readings Vale couldn't interpret. Harrow still clutched the journal, but as Webb noticed it, two soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, prying it from the communication specialist's grip despite his desperate protests. The official after-action report filed with Marine Forces Special Operations Command on October 24, 1994, stated that a 5-man force reconnaissance team conducting routine terrain mapping exercises in the Monongahela National Forest had encountered a catastrophic equipment failure involving a portable generator that leaked carbon monoxide into their temporary shelter, resulting in acute hypoxia, severe hallucinations, and the tragic death of Sergeant Elias Creed from exposure-related injuries sustained during a disoriented attempt to seek help. The report was classified confidential, a relatively low security level designed specifically to make it boring, unremarkable, the kind of training accident that happened occasionally and warranted no further investigation. Staff Sergeant Marcus Vale was medically retired from active duty on December 3, 1994. Diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and chronic radiation syndrome of unknown origin. His service record sealed, and his disability benefits processed through a Department of Defense account that existed in no official budget, and he was relocated to a small town in Montana under a name that wasn't his own, with monthly visits from psychiatrists who asked very specific questions about his memory and prescribed medications that kept his dreams manageable but never entirely silent. Corporal Ben Kodiaks Brenner spent 11 months in a secure medical facility in Virginia that appeared on no maps, undergoing treatments for what doctors called acute temporal displacement syndrome, his massive frame withering to half its original size, his hair going completely white, and when he was finally released, he was given a new identity, a monthly stipend and a minder, who checked on him weekly to ensure he hadn't started talking about places that breathed or towns that existed between seconds. He died in 2003 of sudden cardiac arrest at age 47, and the autopsy report, classified top secret and buried in Pentagon archives, noted that his internal organs showed signs of aging inconsistent with his chronological age, as if different parts of his body had experienced time at different rates. Lance Corporal Felix Harrow was transferred to a psychiatric facility in Nevada within 72 hours of extraction, diagnosed with acute paranoid schizophrenia and severe dissociative disorder. But the truth, documented in files that would remain sealed until 2067, was that Harrow couldn't stop remembering. Every moment he'd spent in Ashford Hollow played on an endless loop in his mind with perfect clarity, and worse, He'd begun experiencing memories that weren't his own, fragments of consciousness from the other victims, other October 17ths, other teams that had been absorbed and preserved. And the medications they gave him weren't treating psychosis, but attempting to chemically sever his connection to something that refused to let him go entirely. Private First Class Vincent Yu presented the most disturbing case. His cellular structure had been fundamentally altered during his time in the valley, his body existing in a quantum state that doctors couldn't fully explain, simultaneously solid and translucent depending on the observer. And he was kept in isolation at Fort Detrick's classified biocontainment facility, studied by scientists who'd signed non-disclosure agreements so restrictive that violation carried mandatory death penalties. And according to records that officially don't exist, Yu remained conscious and aware. Despite his body's gradual dissolution, his cells slowly phasing out of normal space-time over the course of 18 months until, on April 17, 1996, he simply ceased to exist in any measurable way. His hospital room found empty, his monitoring equipment still registering a heartbeat and brain activity but displaying no physical form, as if he'd finally completed the preservation process that Ashford Hollow had begun, becoming part of the collection that existed in the spaces between what was real and what was possible. The physical evidence disappeared with ruthless efficiency. The crater where Ashford Hollow had stood was filled with concrete and debris, then covered with tons of contaminated soil from a genuine Superfund site, creating a legal barrier that would keep civilians away for generations under the guise of environmental remediation. And the entire valley was purchased through shell corporations and designated a permanent military exclusion zone for unexploded ordnance disposal. Patrolled by private security contractors who answered to agencies that had no official names. The families of the 4 survivors received carefully crafted stories, documentation of accidents and exposures that explained medical retirements and ongoing treatments, and they were never told that their sons and husbands had encountered something that challenged the fundamental nature of reality itself, that they'd walked into a place where time flowed sideways, and preservation meant eternal awareness trapped in a moment that never ended. Colonel Marcus Webb's Special Activities Division maintained constant surveillance on all 17 identified spatial anomalies across North America, deploying Protocol Blackwood every time the barriers thinned, burning back the intrusions, cauterizing wounds in reality that refused to heal permanently. And deep in classified archives accessible only to personnel with clearances above top-secret code word, there existed projections showing that the cycles were accelerating. That October 17th wasn't the only dangerous date anymore, that the underneath was pressing harder against the membrane, with each passing year patient and hungry and inevitable as gravity. In 2006, satellite imaging detected lights in the valley where Ashford Hollow had been. Despite the concrete and contamination, despite the exclusion zone, despite 12 years of nothing but scorched earth and buried evidence, lights arranged in neat rows suggesting streets and buildings, a church steeple visible through morning fog that shouldn't exist, and a rapid response team was deployed immediately, finding nothing but pristine concrete when they arrived. Yet their helmet cameras recorded footage that couldn't be explained. Shadows moving through spaces that contained no physical objects, and the sound of synchronized breathing echoing from beneath the ground, deep and slow and eternal. Marcus Vail, living under his assumed name in Montana, woke on October 17th every year at exactly 6:47 p.m., the moment they'd first seen the town, his watch, the same one he'd worn that night, briefly displaying the correct date and time before freezing again. And in those moments he could smell wood smoke and frying bacon, could hear big band music from the 1940s drifting through his walls. And sometimes, when the light hit his bathroom mirror at just the right angle, he could see figures standing behind him, heads tilted back, mouths open, breathing in perfect rhythm, waiting with the patience of things that existed outside time, reminding him that he hadn't truly escaped, that he'd been marked, cataloged, tagged for future collection, and that eventually, inevitably, perhaps on some distant October 17th when the barriers grew thin enough, Ashford Hollow would find him again, because places that hungry never really let go of what they've tasted. They just waited for the right moment to finish what they'd started, to complete the preservation process, to add one more specimen to the eternal collection that existed in the deep hollow beneath the mountains. where 247 souls from 1952 still stood in perfect rows, breathing in synchronization, waiting for the next visitors to arrive, waiting to welcome them into a moment that would last forever, into an awareness that never dimmed and never ended, into the breathing dark where time forgot to flow, and the only measure of eternity was the patient rhythm of something vast and alien turning its attention upward, again and again, every 42 years, like clockwork, like breathing, like the tide, inevitable as death and far more patient, because what waited beneath didn't experience time the way living things did. It simply existed, had always existed, would always exist in the spaces between seconds where reality grew thin and preservation was eternal, and the only cost was remembering what it felt like to be alive, while your body became part of something so impossibly ancient that humanity's entire existence was less than a heartbeat in its awareness, a momentary flutter of interest in an existence measured in geological epochs. And as Vale stared at his reflection on every October 17th, watching those figures breathe behind him, he understood the terrible truth that Colonel Webb had never quite articulated. They hadn't been fighting to survive in Ashford Hollow. They'd been auditioning, being evaluated, examined to see if they were worthy additions to the collection. And the fact that they'd been released meant only that they'd passed some incomprehensible test, that they'd been judged suitable for preservation, and now they simply had to wait, marked and claimed, living on borrowed time until the Hollow decided it was ready to finish the harvest it had begun on October 17th, 1994, in a valley that officially didn't exist, in a town that breathed through the cracks in reality, in a place that would always be waiting, patient and eternal, for the next October 17th to arrive. Don't forget to follow our channel for more military encounters. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into phenomena that defy everything we've been taught about reality. And subscribe to join our community of truth seekers who refuse to accept official explanations that ignore overwhelming evidence.